Sergeant Kofi was a police officer in a busy African town. The streets were always crowded with traders, children running around, buses honking, and sellers calling out prices of fruits and vegetables. People knew Kofi very well. He wore his uniform neatly and walked with confidence, but behind that uniform was a man who had grown proud and greedy. Many feared him because they knew he often used his power for himself. One hot afternoon, when the sun was high and people were rushing in the market, Kofi stood at a corner of the road. He stopped random people, sometimes just to show his power. That day, a young woman named Ngozi was walking home. She carried a small handbag and looked simple. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed that she was tired from the day's work. She was not rich, but she worked honestly to care for herself and her family. As Ngozi tried to cross the street, Kofi lifted his hand. "You there," he shouted in a commanding voice. Ngozi stopped quickly, her heart jumping. "Yes, officer?" she asked politely. Kofi narrowed his eyes. "Don't you know you just broke the rule? You crossed when the light was still red." Ngozi looked back at the traffic light. It was green when she crossed. She knew she had done nothing wrong. But fear held her tongue. She spoke softly, "Officer, I waited for the green light. I did not break any rule." Kofi frowned. He liked it when people argued, because it gave him a chance to scare them even more. He stepped closer, his tall shadow falling over her. "Are you calling me a liar? Do you want me to take you to the station?" Ngozi shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I respect you. I only said I did not do wrong." People nearby slowed down to watch. Some traders whispered to each other, "It is Sergeant Kofi again. Who is the unlucky person this time?" They knew his ways. He would accuse someone, then demand money to let them go. Kofi crossed his arms. His voice dropped lower. "You think you can argue and walk away? Not today. You must pay for breaking the law. If you do not, I will arrest you right now." Ngozi's heart sank. She knew she was innocent, but she also knew how things worked. If she refused, he could drag her to the police station, and no one would defend her. She thought of her old mother waiting at home and her younger brother who depended on her. Trouble with the police would only bring shame and more problems. She tried to reason with him again. "Officer, please, I am just going home. I don't have money for a fine." Kofi smirked. "Who said anything about a fine? I said you must settle me here. Quickly, before I change my mind." Ngozi's stomach tightened. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage. Around her, people pretended not to see too much. Some turned their faces away. Others simply watched silently, afraid to interfere. They all knew Kofi had power. A small boy selling oranges whispered to his friend, "Why doesn't anyone stop him? She looks innocent." The friend replied, "Because if you fight Kofi, tomorrow he will come after you. Everyone is afraid." Ngozi slowly reached into her small handbag. Her fingers trembled as she touched the few notes she had. That money was supposed to buy food for her family. It hurt her heart to think of handing it over. But the fear of being dragged away in shame was stronger. She pulled out the money and held it carefully. She could barely look up. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Please, take this." Kofi snatched the notes without shame. He slipped them into his pocket as if it was his right. "Good," he said with a smile that was not kind. "Now you may go. But next time, remember not to argue with me." Ngozi lowered her head. Her heart was heavy. She wanted to speak, to say it was wrong, to tell him he was supposed to protect people, not steal from them. But her lips remained closed. She turned and walked away slowly, her feet heavy as if carrying stones. Behind her, Kofi stood proudly, adjusting his cap. He looked around at the crowd as if daring anyone to challenge him. But no one spoke. People scattered, going back to their businesses. The market noises returned, but the air still carried the bitterness of what had just happened. As Ngozi walked further, her eyes became wet with tears. She whispered to herself, "Why must it be this way? Why must the ones who should protect us be the ones who hurt us?" She wiped her face quickly, not wanting strangers to see her weakness. Inside, however, her heart burned with sadness and anger. Kofi, on the other hand, felt satisfied. To him, it was just another day, another person he had forced to give him money. He did not know that this small act of corruption would soon open the door to something much bigger, something he could not control. The sun slowly began to set over the town, and the busy streets started to calm. But inside Ngozi's heart, the moment would not calm. She carried the weight of injustice all the way home. She did not know yet that her choice to stay silent that afternoon would soon change, and her voice would one day be heard by many. Ngozi walked away from Sergeant Kofi that day, but her steps were slow, and her heart was heavy. The money she had given him was supposed to buy food for her family. Now it was gone. Her mother at home would ask about dinner, and her younger brother would wait for bread. She felt as if the officer had not only taken her money but also stolen her dignity. When she reached her small house, she tried to smile, but the sadness in her eyes could not hide. That night she sat quietly in the corner, replaying the event again and again in her mind. She kept hearing Kofi's voice demanding money, and she kept seeing the way people had turned their faces away, pretending not to notice. The next morning, she met her friend Amora in the market. Amora was her close companion, someone she could trust. They often shared stories, dreams, and worries. Ngozi wanted to keep silent, but the weight in her heart was too heavy. Finally, she spoke. "Amora," she whispered, looking around to make sure no one was too close. "Something happened yesterday. Sergeant Kofi stopped me in the street. He accused me of breaking a rule. I did nothing wrong, but he demanded money. I gave him the little I had. I felt so helpless." Amora's eyes widened. "Ngozi, you should not talk about this too loudly. Everyone knows Kofi. He uses his power to take from people. If you speak too much, he may come after you." Ngozi lowered her voice even more. "But how can I keep silent? He will do it again and again to others. Maybe next time, it will be someone weaker than me, someone who cannot even pay. Is it right to just let him continue?" Amora touched her hand gently. "My sister, I understand. But fighting the police is dangerous. They protect each other. People have tried before, and nothing changed. You should forget it. Protect yourself." But Ngozi could not forget. Every time she saw her brother eating small pieces of yam, she remembered the money she had lost. Every time she saw an officer on the street, she remembered the unfairness. In her sleep, she dreamed of the scene, hearing Kofi's harsh words. That evening, she sat by a small lamp in her room. The paper and pen lay before her. At first, her hand shook, but slowly she began to write. She did not use big words. She only wrote the truth. She wrote about how she had been stopped, accused wrongly, and forced to give money. She described her fear, her shame, and the way people had witnessed it. She ended with the words, "This man is supposed to protect us, but he is hurting us. Please, I ask for justice." When she finished, she looked at the paper for a long time. Her heart beat fast. She wondered if it was foolish. What if the letter was discovered? What if the officer found out? But then she thought of her mother, her brother, and the many others who could face the same abuse. She folded the paper carefully and decided. The next day, she went to a nearby town where nobody knew her well. There was a small office that carried complaints to higher authorities. She asked a kind-looking clerk for help. "I want this to reach the district attorney's office," she said softly, handing over the folded paper. The clerk looked at her curiously. "Do you want to put your name?" Ngozi shook her head. "No, please. Keep it secret. Just send it. That is all I ask." The clerk nodded. "As you wish. It will reach." As she walked out of the office, Ngozi felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because she had taken a bold step against a powerful man. Relief, because at least she had spoken the truth somewhere. She did not know if anything would happen. She only knew she had tried. When she returned home, Amora visited again. "Ngozi, you look different today," Amora said. "What did you do?" Ngozi smiled faintly. "I could not keep silent. I wrote a complaint. I sent it to the district attorney. Maybe nothing will happen, but at least I will not blame myself for staying quiet." Amora gasped. "Ngozi, that is dangerous. If Kofi finds out, you will be in trouble." Ngozi touched her friend's hand gently. "Sometimes, silence is also trouble. If no one speaks, nothing changes. I am afraid, yes. But I also hope. Hope that maybe someone will listen." Days passed. Ngozi went back to her normal work, but inside she waited. She wondered if the letter had been read. She wondered if the district attorney even cared. Each time she saw Sergeant Kofi on the street, walking with pride, her heart trembled. But she held on to the hope that truth would one day be stronger than fear. She did not know that far away, in the district attorney's office, her letter had already been opened. It lay on a wooden table, among many other papers. But her words, though simple, carried weight. The man who read it paused, frowning. He had heard rumors of corruption before, but here was a voice, clear and brave, describing the act directly. He placed the letter aside, marking it for attention. Meanwhile, in her small home, Ngozi sat quietly by the lamp again, whispering to herself. I have done my part. Now, let the truth find its way. She did not know what the future held, but deep in her heart, she felt lighter than before. She had chosen courage over silence. Mr. Adiwale, the district attorney, sat in his office one quiet morning when his clerk brought him a letter. It was folded carefully, the handwriting neat but simple. Adiwale opened it and began to read. His face grew serious as he read every word. The writer did not sign a name, but the story was clear. A police officer, Sergeant Kofi, had stopped a young woman, accused her wrongly, and forced her to pay money. Adiwale read it twice. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the table slowly. Another complaint, his assistant murmured. These letters come often, but nothing usually changes. But Adiwale shook his head. No. This one is different. The words are plain, honest, and heavy. I feel truth in them. He placed the letter on the desk and stared at it for a long moment. Many people in the town feared officers like Kofi. Most would never dare to write. Whoever wrote this had shown great courage. Adiwale knew he could not let it pass. Still, he also knew the challenge before him. Sergeant Kofi had power. He was known in the town, and he had friends in high places. Many people believed he was untouchable. But Adiwale was not a man who feared power. He believed justice should protect the weak, not the strong. The next day, Adiwale called a small meeting in his office. 2 trusted officers, men he had worked with for years, came to sit with him. He closed the door and lowered his voice. There is a case I want you to handle quietly, he said. A police sergeant is taking bribes from people on the street. His name is Kofi. The 2 men exchanged glances. One whispered, Sir, that man is dangerous. Everyone knows him. If he discovers we are watching, he will strike back. Adiwale's voice was firm. That is why we must be careful. But listen to me, this town cannot live in fear forever. If officers of the law steal from the people, then who will protect the innocent? We must act, and we must act wisely. The men nodded slowly. They trusted Adiwale. He was known as a man of his word, one who did not bend to fear or money. That week, undercover officers began to move quietly through the streets. They wore simple clothes like ordinary villagers. They carried no signs that showed they were officers. They watched Kofi from a distance. It did not take long before they saw the truth. On the first day, Kofi stopped a man carrying yams. He accused the man of selling in the wrong place and demanded money to let him go. The man, afraid of being arrested, gave him coins. On another day, Kofi stopped a young boy riding a bicycle. He said the bicycle was stolen, even though the boy showed proof it was his. The boy's father arrived, trembling with fear. Kofi smiled coldly and whispered, Pay something, and I will forget this. The father handed him notes quickly, and Kofi walked away with pride. The undercover officers recorded everything. They wrote down times, places, and witnesses. Each day, they followed Kofi, pretending to be ordinary people, but quietly noting every bribe. They were shocked by how many people he trapped. Women, men, traders, even students, nobody was safe from his greed. One evening, the officers returned to Adiwale's office with their reports. They laid the papers before him. Sir, we have proof, one said. We saw him take money from many people. He does this daily. He uses fear as his weapon. Adiwale looked at the reports, his face calm but firm. Then the letter was true, he said softly. The young woman who wrote it was brave. Now it is our duty to honor that courage. He decided the investigation must go further. They could not only accuse Kofi with words. They needed strong evidence, something that no one could deny. Adiwale planned a trap. The next morning, one of the undercover officers dressed as a trader. He carried a small bag of goods and walked into the street where Kofi often stood. As expected, Kofi stopped him. Where is your license to trade here? Kofi asked sharply. The man bowed his head. I have no license, officer. I am only trying to sell to feed my family. Kofi's eyes narrowed. Then you must pay me. Otherwise, I will take you to the station, and you will suffer there. The man looked frightened. How much? Kofi smiled coldly and stretched out his hand. Give me what you have. The man placed money into his palm. Kofi quickly slipped it into his pocket and waved him away. What Kofi did not know was that 2 other officers were hiding nearby, watching closely. They took photographs. They recorded his voice. Every move was captured. Later that day, Adewale held the evidence in his hands. He felt a heavy weight, but also a spark of hope. 4 years, people had complained about officers like Kofi. Now, he finally had proof strong enough to break the wall of fear. That evening, Adewale sat alone in his office. He thought about the young woman who had sent the letter. He did not know her name, but he felt her courage had started something powerful. One small voice had opened the door for justice. In the streets, Kofi still walked with pride, thinking nobody could touch him. He laughed loudly with his fellow officers, as if he owned the town. But deep in his heart, he had no idea that his time was running out. Justice was moving quietly, step by step, preparing to expose his actions. And when the truth came, it would not be just whispers in the market, it would be a storm strong enough to shake the whole community. The news spread across the town that there would be a public court session. People whispered about it in the market, at the water well, and even in the small churches. Everyone wanted to know why the district attorney had called the people together. By morning, the town square was full. Men, women, and even children came to see what would happen. At the front, a long table was placed. District Attorney Adewale sat there, calm but firm. Beside him were elders of the town, men with grey hair who carried respect. Soldiers stood quietly to keep order, but they did not speak. The people waited, their eyes full of questions. Then Sergeant Kofi was brought forward. He wore his police uniform, but his face was pale. He tried to walk with pride, but his steps were heavy. Some people in the crowd muttered. Others shook their heads. 4 years, many had suffered because of him, but few had ever spoken out. Adewale rose to his feet. His voice was strong and clear. We are here today to face the truth. The law is not for fear. The law is for justice. And no one, whether poor or powerful, should stand above it. The crowd grew quiet. They listened closely. Then, to everyone's surprise, Adewale called a name, Ngozi, please step forward. A young woman slowly came out of the crowd. Her steps were gentle, her hands shaking a little, but her eyes held courage. Many people gasped when they saw her. She was the one Kofi had stopped on the street. Nobody had expected her to stand here. Kofi's eyes widened. He had not thought she would ever speak. He clenched his jaw and looked away. Adewale smiled kindly at Ngozi. Tell the people what happened on that day, he said. Ngozi swallowed hard. She looked at the crowd. Some faces gave her courage, others waited in silence. Then she spoke. Sergeant Kofi stopped me on the road. He said I broke a rule, but I did not. He asked me for money. I was afraid. I gave him the little I had. I felt shame, but I knew I had no choice. I went home in tears. Her voice trembled, but her words were strong. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Some clenched their fists. Many of them had their own stories, but they had stayed silent until now. Adewale raised his hand, and the people fell silent again. He turned to the table and lifted some papers. Ngozi's words are not the only proof. We have evidence. He held up a small device. Here is a recording. Listen well. He pressed a button, and the sound of Kofi's voice filled the square. Everyone could hear him demanding money from a trader. His words were sharp, greedy, without shame. The people gasped. Some shouted angrily. Next, Adewale showed photographs. They were clear. Kofi stretching out his hand, Kofi taking money, Kofi pocketing it quickly. Then came reports written by undercover officers. Each line told the same story: bribes, threats, fear. Finally, Adewale held up a bag. Inside was money marked and traced directly to Kofi. This, Adewale said firmly, is the truth. The man who wore the uniform to protect you was stealing from you. The man who should have served justice used fear to feed his pride. The crowd erupted. Some cried out in anger. Women shook their heads. Old men groaned loudly. A child whispered to his mother, so the officer was the thief. The mother hugged him tightly, her eyes full of sorrow. Kofi's face grew red. He tried to speak, but his words were drowned by the noise. Finally, Adewale raised his hand again. Slowly, the voices fell quiet. Kofi, Adewale said, turning to him. You wore the badge of the law. Do you deny what you hear and see now? Do you deny the voices of the people? Kofi looked down. His pride was broken, but his tongue was heavy. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was louder than any answer. The elders leaned forward. One of them, an old man with white hair, stood and spoke. His voice carried wisdom and sorrow. We warned long ago, he said, that pride and greed will destroy even the strongest man. Kofi, you have brought shame on yourself and on the law you swore to keep. You have stolen not only money but also the trust of the people. The crowd murmured in agreement. Another elder spoke. We see the pain in the faces of these people. We see the courage of this young woman, Ngozi, who dared to speak when others stayed silent. The truth is before us, and no lie can cover it. Kofi bowed his head lower. For the first time, he looked small. The uniform that once gave him power now looked heavy on his shoulders. Adewale stepped forward. This court will not let corruption rule. Today we expose what was hidden. The people of this town must know that justice is not asleep. The people clapped, some shouted, others raised their hands in relief. For years, they had felt powerless. Today, they saw hope. Ngozi stood quietly, her eyes filled with tears. She had been only one woman, yet her voice had opened the door for change. Adewale looked at her with respect. You have done well, he said softly. You spoke truth, and truth has power. As the sun lowered in the sky, the court session ended, but the memory of that day would remain in every heart. The officer who once walked with pride now stood exposed before all. The crowd left with whispers, with shouts, with hope that justice was alive again in their town. The day of judgment finally came. The courtroom was full again, and people gathered outside the building, waiting to hear the news. The air was heavy with expectation. For weeks, the case had been the talk of the town. Farmers spoke of it in the fields, women discussed it while selling vegetables, and children whispered about it in the streets. Everyone wanted to know what would happen to Sergeant Kofi. The judge, an old man with a deep voice, entered the courtroom. The people stood up in respect and then sat quietly. Kofi stood before the court, his hands shaking. His police uniform was still on, but it looked empty of power now. His eyes darted around the room, but he found no friendly face. Those who once feared him now looked at him with anger and disappointment. The judge cleared his throat and spoke slowly, so every word could sink deep into the hearts of the people. We have heard the case. We have listened to the voices of witnesses. We have seen the evidence. The truth is clear. Sergeant Kofi has used his position to harm the people he swore to protect. There was a murmur in the room. Kofi bowed his head. The judge continued, his voice firm. Justice does not look at rank. Justice does not bow to fear. Today, we declare Sergeant Kofi guilty of corruption. The words echoed in the courtroom. Outside, the crowd waiting near the windows shouted, "Guilty! Guilty!" The judge raised his hand, and the room fell quiet again. He has lost the honor of his position. He is no longer a police officer. He will face punishment, so that others may learn that corruption has no place in our land. Gasps and claps filled the room. For the first time in many years, people felt hope. The man who had once walked through the market with pride, collecting bribes without fear, was finally stripped of his power. Kofi tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Please, please have mercy, he whispered. But the judge shook his head. Mercy belongs to those who show mercy. You gave none to the people you robbed. The guards came and led Kofi away. His shoulders were bent, his steps heavy. For the first time, he was the one without power, the one who could not escape the law. Then all eyes turned to Ngozi. She stood quietly in the middle of the courtroom, her face calm but her eyes shining with tears. Adewale, the district attorney, walked toward her. He raised his hand to the people and said, "This young woman has shown us what courage looks like. She stood when others were silent. She spoke truth when fear tried to close her mouth. Today, we honor her bravery." The people clapped loudly. Some women ululated in joy, and children cheered her name. "Ngozi! Ngozi!" they shouted. She bowed her head humbly, whispering, "I only wanted justice." Adewale's voice grew strong again. He faced the crowd and said, "Let today be remembered. Justice is for all. No man, no woman, no officer, no leader can hide from the truth. Corruption cannot live in darkness when the people stand with courage." The words touched every heart. Men nodded. Women wiped their tears. Even the elders, who had seen many seasons of life, agreed that this day was a turning point for the town. After the court ended, people filled the streets, talking about what they had seen. Some said, "The law is alive again." Others said, "Our children will grow in a better town." Even the traders in the market felt lighter, knowing they would no longer be forced to give bribes to Kofi. Ngozi walked home slowly, her basket in her hand. She remembered the day she had felt small and afraid when Kofi demanded money from her. Now things had changed. She was no longer afraid. She had found her voice, and through her, the town had found strength. Her neighbors came to greet her. One old woman hugged her and said, "You have done what many of us could not. May you be blessed." A young boy ran to her and said, "One day, I want to be brave like you." That night, the town was alive with talk. In homes, people told their children the story. Father said, "Do not be afraid to speak the truth." Mother said, "Always stand for what is right." The story of Ngozi and the corrupt officer became a lesson that would be told for many years. Kofi's fall was not just his own story. It became the story of the people. It showed them that silence feeds corruption, but courage can break it. It showed them that even the poor and powerless can bring change when they stand for truth. Ngozi sat quietly in her small room that night. She looked at the stars through her window and whispered a prayer of thanks. She was not proud. She only felt peace, knowing that her small act of courage had helped her people. The town slept with lighter hearts. They had seen justice with their own eyes. They had learned that honesty and courage are stronger than fear and lies. And from that day, they walked with more hope, believing that no darkness could hide the light of truth. The lesson was clear. Honesty is strength. Courage is power. And justice belongs to all.